Enterprise Influencers, Perspectives from Technology Leaders.
Welcome to the Enterprise Influencers podcast, where we explore the inner workings of large organizations and the people and technologies that help them get things done. We're your hosts, Patrick Falgoust and Giles Hamson. We both worked as consultants and within the IT departments for some of the world's largest organizations. We'll be bringing you candid discussions from industry leaders that are helping to shape the future of enterprise technology and exploring what influences the decision makers at large organizations make. So let's get
started.
Yeah. Let's talk about what is this podcast about? What do we intend to cover on the podcast? Tell us your side of that.
Man, that's a good question, because you wrote me into this, right? Like you said, hey, we need to have a podcast. And I'm assuming it's because you found the things that we talk about on a regular basis so interesting that you felt like the entire internet needed to hear about them. But we've had the chance to work together at a couple of different organizations, and I think you and I have always had a good kind of working relationship. And you're someone that I've always admired from a technology perspective, from a leadership perspective, and somebody that I think has always had a good viewpoint of where technology is going, how teams are led, and things of that nature. Thought it'd be fun why don't we get together, bring together some of our coworkers, colleagues, partners, customers, people that we've worked with in the past, and explore this whole concept of how do you get things done in a large enterprise? How do decisions get made? Sometimes we're the guys who decisions are made about. Sometimes we're the people making those decisions, and a lot of times it can feel like, hey, these things are random, right? Why did this decision get made? Why did that manager do this? He's such an idiot. So why don't we just talk about it and get to understand a little bit about how those kind of things come about and what those influences are. So that's my perspective. I think it's an interesting topic, and there's lots of different ways that we can go with this. Yeah, like when you said, hey, let's do a podcast. Let's give it a go.
Let's give it a go. Well, and
what about you?
Obviously, we've worked together for a long time now in a couple of different organizations, one of them being consulting, one of them being an enterprise organization. And then even when we were consulting, we were doing stuff for large companies in very specific industries like oil and gas and tax and all kinds of things like that. And they all do their IT in a slightly different way, because they've got their own measures and things that they've got to gain from it as well, and things like that. So it is interesting. It's worth talking about. And honestly, I don't see many people talking about it. There's always a lot of kind of influence of articles coming from various different companies and things like that. And don't get me wrong, this is not like a stick it to the man kind of thing.
Definitely not.
It's just a discussion about the situations that we find ourselves in, because you're right, weird things happen in organizations, especially large organizations, but there's always underlying reasons for it to propel that business forward and things like that too. And sometimes that, as it filters down, does not necessarily seem fair or doesn't seem to make sense. But there's pretty much logic for my thought.
Pretty much. Sometimes there's not.
Sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's power play. We should discuss that too.
But that's a topic for an episode, possibly.
Play, right?
That's power play.
So with that in mind, we're not going to necessarily talk specifically about the jobs or companies that we're in right now, at least not specifically naming them. We'll be, talking about topics from our careers, right?
I think, this isn't a podcast about our job today, right? It's a podcast about pulling from our background, from our history, from our networks to explore different topics. And hopefully these things will be somewhat universal, right? They're not necessarily aimed at a specific organization or technology stack or anything like that. Really, it's more about universal concepts that we can all get our head around.
That's right. So with that in mind, then, we need to get people interested as to why they should listen to us.
It's a very good question.
Right? Why should they even listen to Patrick and Giles? So, Patrick, tell me a little bit about your career. You don't have to start as a baby. You can just,
Yeah, we'll start as a fully formed adult,
Excellent.
maybe. But yeah, my career's been pretty interesting. Would say not at like I'm not the CEO, I'm not like the top of the heap or anything like that, but I've done a few interesting things in my career. I went to college. I studied industrial and systems engineering at the University of Florida. Graduated there in the late 90s, let's say. But I was an engineer. I was a guy. My first job out of college was with a large organization, defense contract. I don't know if people can probably look up who I am on LinkedIn and they can see the companies I've worked for. And I went into an industrial engineering industry job. I was doing defense contractor stuff. I was doing simulations of airlift operations for the Air Force and Marines and trying to sell large airplanes. But what that got me, and I had no interest in any kind of IT technology or anything like that, but what I did have was a problem where I had large amounts of information and limited time to do things. So I actually got into some coding. I got into access databases and writing VBA code. And that kind of spurned my this was the thing to help me do my job better. I got into some different things. My company paid for some training classes. And I very quickly realized that, hey, this IT industry is booming. And if you wanted to move up the ladder pretty quickly, that was the way to go. And so I hated my job. I hated working in a large organization because I was a cocky 22, 23-year-old in a large organization where most people that have been working there were working there for 30 or 40 years and on the verge of retirement. So I left after a year. I went to work for, at that time, a small, kind of really small, like I think there were 6 or 8 people in the company I went to work for. And we were doing medical software. So I became a software developer, did that for a little while. I went into a consulting business for a few years. And then in that consulting business is where I really started around some large enterprise accounts. Like we did work for some smaller organizations around the Atlanta market. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, or just north of Atlanta, Georgia. And we started getting involved in some really big accounts. And that was my first entry into, hey, these are enterprise, like big, large problems. We've got tens of thousands of people using our software that we're building. So that was quite interesting. Actually, left there after a while. I worked for a company that was doing another small company doing some interesting things with video and like CCTV and DVR technology back in the early 2000s. Actually took a little bit of a swerve and got my real estate license at one point and tried to chuck IT altogether. So a little bit of real estate stuff, sold a few houses, but really where it all started to come together, I had a good friend of mine who was like, hey, I'm working for this company. It's really cool. The owners are awesome. It's got a great culture, but it was a consulting company, and it was a consulting company that was really focused on Microsoft technologies and working mostly in the local kind of Atlanta market. That company, so I finally agreed, interviewed, got the job, joined, ended up being one of the best companies I've ever worked for. Still friends to this day with many of the people that I worked with. That led me to a moment where one of the co-founders of the company and said, hey, Patrick, you're a senior kind of dev guy. You can talk to people like okay. And our salespeople have this thing called SharePoint that they want to sell. And all of our customers are asking for it. And so they said, can you take this on and basically, can you figure out how do we sell it and how do we deliver it? So I said, okay. I was one of these, okay, I'll take that on and we'll see where this goes. Fast forward maybe 6 years later, that company's probably doubled or tripled in size. We are doing business with a lot of enterprise, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 accounts, certainly accounts that you would know if I name them. Mm-hmm. We were doing a lot of really interesting projects, building applications, building intranets and websites and working with marketing teams, sales teams, corporate communication, IT. So we got a really good view of here's all cool stuff that these enterprises are doing and how do they collaborate? How do they run their marketing teams and all this sort of stuff. So that was a very eye-opening experience. Short story, like company got sold, got bought by a much bigger company. I didn't get rich and I left. So at that point, and this kind of gets into where you and I cross paths, right?
Mhm.
For the first time. I really liked that small company culture. I loved the enterprise accounts that we were working with. And I wanted to keep doing things in that same sort of vein. So what I did is I actually did something a little entrepreneurial. I was too scared to put my money on the line and go out and start my own company. So what I did is I located organizations that were doing the same type of work that we were doing. That was an interesting bit of work. And I wrote them a letter and said, hey, this is who I am. These are some of the things I've done. And I'm interested in starting a branch of your company in the Atlanta market or in the Southeast market. And I think I wrote about 5 letters. 2 people wrote me back right away. One of them I talked to and it was didn't quite mesh. The other was like, yeah, why don't you come up to New Jersey and let's chat. And so I got on a plane, went to New Jersey. Like we basically ironed out a deal, and like within a month, I was like starting the Southeast division of a smallish, mid-sized like consulting company.
I had no idea how it started.
All the secrets that will come revealed, and that was terrifying, definitely a leap of faith, but like I said, at least it wasn't on my own dime. But it was basically me for a good period of time. I was trying to win some work based off the reputation that this organization had, which was a very good reputation, still is. And yeah, we don't need any lawsuits or anything like that on our first podcast. So just to clarify, still got a good reputation. But yeah, we started chasing some business. We got one of our first contracts was with a big, again, enterprise organization in the fast quick serve restaurant industry. One of the biggest quick serve restaurant companies out there, doing, again, same type of work that we were doing in kind of intranets, portals, corporate communications, collaboration. So that whole space. So that was a very interesting journey. Learned a ton of what to do, what not to do. During that same time, our company started pivoting away from consulting work and going more into like more of a product direction. And so I took that ride for a bit, and that's how I shifted into more of a product management space. So I was in from a consultant to a solution architect to more of like consulting leadership and kind of general management of a consulting organization to product management and trying to take a concept and bring it to a market and build, a business around it. And so I dabbled with that, ended up leaving that company, fluttered around for a bit, doing some contract gigs and things like that. And then ultimately landed, well, not ultimately, because the stop I was at previous to where I am now was in the same space that I was working with. And I was given a product that was fairly immature in a market that was also fairly immature, and said, hey, here's the team, here's the product, we've got these leads, we've got these salespeople, we need you to make a business out of this. And so that was about almost a 4-year journey working with that company where we took this kind of immature product, grew it up, got it into some fairly large enterprise organizations. And so that was a whole different aspect of the enterprise that we were exploring, right? We'd done consulting engagements, but now we were actually managing a product where these enterprise customers were our customers, and how do we support them? How do we manage a roadmap with them? So there's all these sort of interesting aspects to it. And then unfortunately, one of the things I discovered during that time was that, hey, you know what? It's really hard to build a product in a consulting company. For the listeners out there, if you're thinking about it, it can be done, but it is really hard.
That transition.
It can be, At some
time-based
point,
revenue, right?
at
better
some
cut the
point,
cord.
as a consulting company, you've got to cut the cord, and it can be hairy. So it had become clear that the organization I was working for didn't want to fully productize and go that product route. And so I took the opportunity. An opportunity came up with a very large professional services accounting organization to take over their SharePoint Online. And so I took that opportunity, and I today work within the IT organization of a very large organization that's global in nature, that has hundreds of thousands of employees and some really interesting things going on. Today, I manage SharePoint Online. I manage a lot of the related services for the Microsoft 365 stack. I manage the Power Platform, which is a citizen dev, low code, no code, fun stuff that is going on in the world today. And I've got a team of product managers, developers, business analysts, testers, all that kind of fun stuff that roll up into my organization. And we're out there, we're not working directly with our customers, but we're enabling the people within that organization that do work with customers to do their jobs and to drive great experiences and projects for our customers. And then we had the opportunity to work at that same company. You were actually on my team, and then you left. So to take on some interesting new things, right? And so that's why we're doing this, because now we can actually talk and chat and have fun with it. But that's pretty much gets you up to date. Along the way, I had a couple of kids. My wife and I have 4 kids. We live in the northern suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. Not going to give you my address or anything, but we've got a pretty good thing. I work remotely from home, which is always that's been a transition slowly over the years, but I work with a fully remote team. So maybe that's something we can explore at some point. The concept of how do you actually work at home, lead a remote team, and actually be productive and get things done like that. Although some people may argue with me on that point, it's difficult. It can be a real challenge, and keeping people engaged and keeping people feeling part of the team.
That's a current challenge, right? We had a pandemic for 2 years. Like, it's a challenge that the world has had to deal with. So
I didn't mention that, but yeah, I started my new job, the one I'm currently in, on January of 2020. And so I'm like, hey, this is great. I got this new gig, and like, I'm going to maybe get to travel a little bit. And then boom, COVID in March. Yeah, I literally I've been there for a little over 2 years, and I literally just took my first business trip like last month. So yeah, I guess be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but anyway, that's a little bit about me, and I'm sure we'll explore many stories about the whole deal of all the stuff that we've collectively been through. But just to give you a bit of anyway, enough about me. Let's hear about you, Giles. Where are you in this whole journey?
Yeah, obviously you can tell from my accent I'm not from the US, but I do live in the US, so I'm based out of Austin, Texas now.
You're Texan. I recognize the Texas accent. Yeah.
I like barbecue, so that's good. So,
that's a prerequisite.
I think they throw you out of Texas if you don't like barbecue. Yeah, so I did a degree in business information technology. I was never particularly academic. Still honestly not particularly academic, but so I went to a university that wasn't particularly well known, would be the equivalent of a community college here in the US. And mostly I went there because I didn't want to get a job. And I did well enough there. So I started with a diploma course, and then I liked it because I liked the lifestyle of being a student and living away from home and all that kind of stuff. So I then decided, this is worth doing something else. So I did well enough to then get onto the degree course and stayed there for 4 years. And as part of that, there was a gap year where I worked for in the UK, they call a building society, which is a credit union over here. Mm-hmm. So it's owned by the bankers. And that was during the 2000 times, right? Like 1999 to 2000. So
seems so long ago.
You got J-Lo singing about it and all that kind of stuff. So they had this really good intern program. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. As you can tell from behind me, I'm basically a big nerd. I've had computers since I was like 3 years old. It passed me down from my brother and all that kind of stuff. So I've just loved technology overall. I would probably argue I'm a technological enthusiast in general. And I like to solve problems as a person. So that's what drives me on this stuff. So they had this intern program that kind of put me into a researching role. They had an operational role where I was dealing with ACL mainframes and Ashwin scheduling and all this kind of stuff. I was rooting around like mainframe COBOL code for Y2K bugs, and they had this situation where they had this court case because they needed to dig out some records from an archive, but the archive was on this big tape, and they didn't have anyone who knew VB. But they had this common control, and they wanted me to work that out. So they just put me in front of a screen and go, "Here you go, cheap person over here. We need this by this date. Go." And they threw a book at me, and it worked. It just, and then they put me around to different areas of the department. So one area I was part of like mortgages and things like that. And I just got this taste of fulfilling IT for business purposes. And I got that taste of it. So I finished my degree, passed my degree, got a drinker's equivalent grade. And then I joined like this life assurance company. And my first role there was Office 2002 access to databases, where they were bringing in feeds from banks and all this kind of stuff as well. And my first job was to try and automate it. And unfortunately, it made quite a few people redundant as a result. But again, it was just a fascinating thing. And I found that if I look past over my career, I seem to chase different industries that I find interesting. So I did that for a bit. I went over to a facilities company as a technical researcher. And at this point, like I did a bit of Microsoft, I've done a bit of COBOL, I sell mainframes, VB, access databases. So I then joined a company that was actively trying to move away from Microsoft and try and entirely be Linux, because they hated that select licensing. So I became a technical researcher, reverse engineering Microsoft stuff so that we could work on Linux stuff. I don't know that I've ever told you that stuff before.
No, but there's a bunch of like millennial listeners right now who are like, man, these guys are old and they're talking about this old technology. What's an access database?
Yeah, man. And you're right to think that, millennials.
Yes, absolutely.
Just ignore it nowadays. So, even Microsoft ignores it nowadays. It's like,
yes, indeed,
bastard child of software.
But it started so many people down the path of writing code. So
hey, man, that's
not that you
database powered Exchange during the NT days.
Yeah, and not that you have to write code to be an IT or be an influencer either. So
that's right. That's right. So
this is not a coding podcast.
No, it's not. And I've never actually worked as a developer. I've just been given development-like projects. And because I've been a coder in my quote spare time, I've lended my skill set to it.
It's
basically
probably questionable if I should have been allowed to be called a developer, but
I should not be called a coder, and mainly because I see, we have all this power. Why do I need to make this efficient?
We will not go. We will not go there. But anyway, I've interrupted you.
No, so I did that, and then so I joined this facilities company, tried to help them get off, and there was a whole wealth of technological research stuff. So we did stuff from like, how do you distribute virus definition files globally? And this company had 300,000 employees around the world. There's a lot of presence in China and in Asia Pac and all that kind of stuff. And so I learned a lot about distribution of that. We created our own version of Linux based on the kernels. I can't even imagine why we would do that now. But the idea being is that you give someone a disk and stick it in something that we predetermined from Dell, that someone in China who knew nothing about it suddenly had a mail server and it was connected to our domain, and we scripted all that and all that kind of stuff. Then, complete U-turn, because I happen to have a recruitment friend, which is interesting. I seem to follow recruitment people. My wife was a recruiter as well, and all that kind of stuff. It's not on purpose, it's just happenstance. They said there's this really good opportunity at Microsoft. And I think with your ability to speak to people, plus your nerdiness and everything else, and your consultancy ability and all that kind of stuff, that you would be great for them. I don't think they know that yet, so this is going to be a bit of a journey, but I think you're right for them. So I want to put you in front of them. So I did an interview with them. I ended up having 11 interviews with them, plus exams to prove, because this was at the time of the Steve Ballmer times of Microsoft. And
certifications were king, that kind of thing?
Certifications were king. You needed to prove that, I had to prove that even though I was working entirely in Linux, I knew enough about Microsoft and I was not against the company
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So I learned .NET, but of course I learned .NET like a Linux person who didn't know about Visual Studio or Visual Interdev or anything like that. I learned how to compile it from the command line. Because that's what a Linux person would do if they never looked at this kind of stuff. I know, it's ridiculous.
Well,
In hindsight, it's ridiculous, right?
But all that's old is new again, so that's...
Well, indeed. So I learned all that stuff. I got the gig. It was 11 months of interviewing for a consulting gig for 1 year. So I stayed there for 1 year, and when I got there, I was part of this project called Project Green, which was bringing its app to Great Plains and the vision together, trying to bring it into some mega ERP product, which totally failed. And I remember being in a call with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer shouting, and I was just this kind of interny kind of consultant going, as they were looking at reports that I generated. And I ended up generating these web parts of this product called SharePoint. I'd never heard of SharePoint before, but they, again, a bit like the credit union place, the building society place, they told me to go down to the Microsoft library in Building 1, get a book and learn. So I did. I had access to the forums for the product group, spoke to them about stuff. I created business intelligence web parts to look into internal databases to work out how we were doing. And
before it was cool, folks. Before it was cool.
Before it was cool, I did something ridiculous and it involved installing Office on your server. But that was the way at the time. So I did that, and then I came out of that. So this is a very long story to come out to say that I came out of that because the contract ended. They offered me a job in support, and I was very arrogant. I never wanted to be in support, so I said, no way, I'm not doing that. Probably a dumb thing to do, to be honest, but still. I came out of it. I put on my resume, hey, I'm looking for a job. I know SharePoint. And oh my God, my phone exploded because apparently I had learned something that everybody wanted. And I knew
at that time,
of Microsoft saying that I had done it as well. And then when they asked me questions about, how do you do this and that and the other to try and prove whether I knew my stuff, obviously I've been writing these web parts. And so I joined the Microsoft Partner Network, partly because there was a guy who I used to work with in that department. This guy who had this great Newcastle accent. It was awesome, and he loved it a bit. And he said that he traveled around the Microsoft networks and the partner networks and came to work for Microsoft. He talked about how good of a time it was, and I went, great. So I joined one in the education market, built a virtual learning product with open source software along with SharePoint, trying to an alternative for class server and all this kind of stuff with something that was considered more popular, worked with the Microsoft education teams and things like that. Created this pseudo product that we sold during the Tony Blair years of academia and lots of money being thrown at schools being rebuilt and all this kind of stuff. And managed to deploy that 50 times and went, I'm done now, and I get bored. And then I moved to a different industry, which was the legal industry. So I moved to London, started doing SharePoint projects for legal firms, websites, document management, workflow, approvals, all that kind of stuff. Did that for a little bit, got bored of that. It's amazing I stayed where I am with you for so long, to be honest. I get bored pretty easily. I then moved to another company, and again, I job hopped to these companies because I kind of know people and they've recommended me, and so it was always chasing that interesting idea. So I then worked for a company that did Project Server, which is EPM, kind of enterprise project management solutions. Yep. And I thought, great, I know SharePoint. They need a SharePoint person. So I then started, they did all kinds of work for all kinds of people. I worked in the defense industry, I worked in the nuclear industry, the energy industry, the insurance industry. I did some stuff for a games company, for a medical software company as well. Yep. And we were doing some really groundbreaking stuff. And because Project Server was such a niche product, especially in a small country like the UK, they were one of the premier partnerships with Microsoft, and they got treated like that. So I got to go onto all kinds of like alpha and beta things over in Seattle and all this kind of stuff, which further fed my love of interest and all that kind of stuff. So I did that for a bit. And then me and my now wife decided that we wanted to emigrate to the US because we'd been consulting a lot and we only saw each other on weekends. We wanted to actually settle down and buy a house. And she had been in the UK for 10 years, but she's from Austin. And we was like, do we live in London in a postage stamp, or do we live in Texas in what to a British person would be the equivalent of a mansion? And really, it's not. It's a no-brainer. So we moved over, and as part of that, the company that you worked for had actually been on and off courting me away from this other company that I worked for a few months. And one day I took their phone call again.
Out of the UK, I'm guessing.
Out of the UK, yes.
Yeah.
Before they are the product company that they are now.
Yeah.
So the person you work with, that we have mutual friends with, who now lives in Austin, reached out to me again and said, hey, we really do want you to come over. And I said, I can't come over right now, but I don't want to. And the reason why I don't is because I'm happy to leave my company, but we've decided that we're going to emigrate. And it turns out that that guy was about to emigrate too.
Yeah. Okay. It all comes together. See, this is the side of things that I never knew about. So,
indeed, right? So I said,
and there's a bunch of listeners right there, or hopefully a bunch of listeners, but they're like, what the hell are these guys talking about?
Exactly. Yeah. So this is hopefully setting it up for future episodes.
Maybe we can get that guy on an episode. That would be.
I think we should.
I think that would be really interesting because he's a character, and I think he has some good things.
He is a character, and last time he kicked my ass at darts in Houston. So yeah.
Yeah, so, I've got New York karaoke stories that I could tell about him.
So I'm moving to Texas in October, and this was like January. But I said so, and I just cheekily said, so if you have an office, I see that you have an office in the US. If you want to hire me, I'm yours.
Yeah.
And he went, I think we can do that. And I went, really? And we did. So, and in between that time, I got married. I bought a house internationally, which is incredibly hard. Don't do it. Buying a house in the US from the UK is an incredibly hard thing to do, and you should never do it. But because I had MOD clearance, I also had energy security clearance as well for nuclear stuff as well. Plus, I had a house and a pre-written job ready to go. My visa came in like that, along with obviously being married to an American. I literally applied in July. I was in the country working in October.
We'll have to do an immigration episode.
Maybe. It's painful, and my wife did most of the hard lifting, and I appreciate it. So I joined that consultancy company. They got me involved in the oil industry. I moved over to that for a little bit as well. That was an account that you managed to a degree at the time, and we worked together there. I stayed there and ended up moving up various different roles in there for a few years. And then we decided to have a family. And I was living in Austin, commuting to Houston, and then taking their private jet over to Oakland.
Are you saying that wasn't an ideal work-life balance situation?
It was not an ideal work-life balance. And just as we've already talked about, I'm pretty stubborn. I did not want to move to Houston. So I wanted to stay in Austin.
That's the correct choice, though.
Yeah.
Not to ostracize any of our Houston listeners, but I think I would prefer to live in Austin than Houston.
It's definitely more my temperament. I'm much more hippie, for sure. So as a result, that was when the oil industry was crashing. It had gone from like $130 a barrel down to 14. At one point, like even in that time, it went to minus, which is crazy. Like, how do you get minus? And we can talk about that as well, because I know exactly how that is.
Yeah, I wonder how IT budgets are impacted by a plummeting oil price. I'm guessing it's probably not a good thing.
I can tell you that wonderful award-winning internet that we worked on together had to get out of that data center pretty darn quick because they had no money. So I learned a lot very quickly in a very short amount of time around Office 365. And in my previous roles, I've been working in the previous version of Office 365, which is BPOS, as well as the Office 365 dedicated that we finally moved away from in my previous role. And then, so I learned a lot about Microsoft stuff, from Intune to SharePoint to Exchange to how to roll it out, how to get people into a new mindset, especially trying to how to get things out of the data center, how to justify why cloud can be financially worthwhile.
And secure
and performance, and having to learn new modern techniques and trying to drag all those old developers with you and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then they wouldn't let me work from home, and I didn't want to stay in Houston. So a friend of mine, who was my counterpart over in Oklahoma, had moved to the company you work for now. They said it was pretty good. I should come over. Remote working is no problem. And it became an urgent thing for me because I was about to start a family. I moved over, and I stayed there for 5-6 years. And I've recently moved again. So in that company, very recently, 2 months ago.
I'm still getting the calls of, wait, what? Giles left the company? But he used to do all this random shit for us.
And now you're thinking, thank God he left, because now I
And
don't
then
have to do it.
and now I'm like, man, I didn't know Giles was working on that. I'm sorry, sir. That's no longer a service that we offer.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Hey, man, it was life and delight at one point, right? So,
Hey, it was. We'll talk about that at some point.
So I was an architect there for a bit, and then they started outsourcing stuff to a sub company that they had over around the world. So then architecture were no longer available to be in the US for most things. So they then moved us all into product management. I became a deputy product manager, then a product manager, and further shifts around and things like that. And then an opportunity came my way to continue product management, where in my previous role, where you went now, it's internal product management for a large company, over 150 different countries and things like that. This role that I'm in now, I get to essentially work for a lot smaller company, 200 people, but they're doing commercial product management. And I'm much more, rather than aligned to the technical side, I'm aligned to the sales side.
Yep.
So it's given me an opportunity to further expand my skill set around the business side of things, some of the stuff that you were doing with in your previous roles as well. And if you looked at my resume, you'd go like, you moved from there to there. Why would you do that? And the real reason is that it's interesting, and I want to learn more.
That's an important aspect of job satisfaction, right? Are you interested in what you're doing, and are you being challenged, and is your organization supportive of where you want to go?
And what I found was that I found myself in a position, and I wasn't working for you at this time, that I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing as much anymore, and I didn't see much of a future. And I thought I could try and maneuver myself again around around the place where I was. But I was looking elsewhere outside as well.
That's the story for our reorganization episode at some point.
The effect of reorganizations and what that means. So, and that makes me sound like I'm disgruntled. I'm not. I really enjoyed every company I've ever worked for, and I even enjoyed the people I worked for in my last team. But it was doing things that, from a career point of view, I was doing 5-6 years ago.
Yep.
And that felt like a step backwards. And as much as it was important for what the company was doing and all that kind of stuff, from my own skill set point of view, I felt like I wasn't growing, and I was starting to get pigeonholed. So I wanted to move out into something new, and I found a company that was prepared to give me that chance. And it's honestly the company I work for now. I was able to be very transparent in that interview, and this is another good thing to talk about in the future.
Oh, right? For sure.
Is transparency and why it's important. So they asked me questions like, "You're working for this large company. Why would you come to us? And what do you think you offer us? And what do you think we can offer you?" So I turned around and said, "You're building a product that we've done internally already. I feel I can help with that. However, I haven't done commercial product management before. So I can bring the technical skill set and help your teams. You can help me learn about the commercial product management side. And if you're in agreement with that, then that sounds like a good deal to me."
Yeah.
And there I am. So that's where we are right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because just reflecting back on, both of our stories, we've both worked for some big companies, like some big well-known companies. We've worked for some smaller companies, some tiny companies that nobody will ever hear of. Some of them aren't around anymore. And I think the thing with that is you don't necessarily have to work for a big company to influence an enterprise organization. You can be a vendor, you can be a partner, you can be just part of a cog in the wheel, if you will. There are many different ways, and they're all valid. So
they are all valid for sure. Yeah. And like I say, I've worked for companies like from 50 people, 20 people, 200 people like I'm in right now.
I
think
up
to the hundreds of thousands. And
I think six people was my record.
Like 6. Oh, I haven't gone that low. I think 20 is my lowest.
Yeah. You better like the people that you work with if you work at a 6-person company.
That's right. That's right. I think it only starts to blur the lines a bit when you get into the thousands, because even in the hundreds, that it gets pretty.
Yeah.
It's like. Sorry, people, but it's true.
It's okay. It's okay. We never discussed if this was going to be an adult podcast or a child-friendly podcast. I think if you're discussing enterprise technology, though, like you're gonna need some expletives every once in a while.
We're going to talk a little bit now for the rest of this episode, just an example of the kind of thing we're going to talk about it, and then we'll conclude. And then our next episode will not be about us. It'll be about a new topic.
We're gonna have a guest. We're
Yeah.
gonna like hopefully have somebody interesting enough to come in and hold down the show.
We're going to cash in some chips with some friends. And yeah.
So what did we decide to talk about here? Because I know now people are like, okay, these guys have talked about themselves for way too long.
If you're still with us, then we're talking about the mindset of high quality leadership. And like we can talk a little bit about our leadership styles, but probably not too much because we've spoken about us already. The circumstances around decision making, and then the idea of the whole point of this podcast, right? The power of influence, managing up as well as managing down.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I've talked a lot here, Patrick. So why don't you start us off?
Yeah, it's funny because like I was asked actually in the interview for the role that I'm in, like, how would you describe your leadership style? I was like, I've not really thought about that. There was a concept that I had read about and heard about, and I think it epitomizes what I think of myself as a leader. And that was the concept of a servant leader, like someone who, so I try to be the leader who is there to support their team, to celebrate their wins and take the blame like when things don't work out. I try to be the leader who protects my team from organizational dysfunction, even if that means I'm taking the brunt of that on for myself, keeping them maybe away from the myriad of Excel worksheets and budgeting templates and plans and business cases and all the boring things that have to get done, but that I want to allow my team to focus on the more exciting stuff, the building, the strategy, the things like that. So not that I don't get involved in that, but so that's what I would describe. And the way that I think that so how do you embody that? I think it's things like you hit on some of these earlier. Trust. You have to build trust with a team. You have to tell the truth, take responsibility, do what you say, keep your commitments. Like those are I think the hallmarks of a good leader. And I think those are, and do I succeed in that every single day, every single minute of every day? Absolutely not. For the most part, I try to maybe have more success than I have failures and kind of keep it hopefully in the win column, if you will.
Because you get told things from your management that you can't really bring down yet because they may not be finalized yet. And
sure,
you don't know who or what that will affect, if it will affect, and all that kind of stuff. So you've got to navigate.
Yeah, and maybe for some context, right? Like my organization now is roughly about 50 people. I've got about 50 people that report into my downline I have people that report directly to me, people that report to them. I've got teams. We've got vendors that we bring in and have to manage. And so that's quite a bit of people. And then the people directly above me are their directors, and they're the directors and executive directors and partners and things like that are making high-level business decisions, driving down policy. And there's definitely, I definitely get caught in the middle there. I get caught in the between the two. Hey, what's going to happen with this thing? Are we going to get reorged? Are we going to get bonuses? Am I going to get promoted? And so sometimes you have to have candid conversations with people, right? If you want to be promoted, like there's steps that you have to take, and you need to increase your visibility. You need to do these things. You need to work on a high profile project. And that can be difficult, right? Because sometimes those are things that people maybe they don't want to hear. You don't want to hear that you're not ready to be promoted. But if you've built up and invested in a relationship with the people that work for you, and you've built up trust over a period of time by modeling your actions, then those conversations, while they may not be comfortable, they are oftentimes accepted and welcome. And people don't want smoke blown at them. They want to hear the truth. They want to hear where they stand.
And if you build up the trust and respect up front. Hard
Exactly.
conversations are easier because they know that.
Exactly. Like, there's a concept of being like nice in the organization. So like you may have a conversation, and rather than having the hard conversation, you have the nice conversation, and that doesn't really do anything for anyone, does it? So those are some of the things I look at from a leadership style, and I think it's been fairly successful. Am I the best leader? I wouldn't say that. I think I have a lot to learn. I think I have a lot to grow. But I think that's also a hallmark of a good leader. They're empathetic and they're humble. Humility is, I think, a very important, which seems really like saying that you're humble seems really not humble. Is that?
That's just recognizing a trait, right? Like I think it's important to be humble and to realize that you can't know everything and that you need your team to support you in the initiatives that you're trying to drive down from management, right? Like it is a team effort, right? So
100%.
you need to sit with the people, as it were, and make sure that they have the respect and trust and know that they can come to you for stuff. Is it the latest innovation of an idea on how they could do something, to some personal situation that's affecting their work, or stuff that is work related but is much more on a personal nature, like how do I get promoted in this organization that is vast and big? You've got thousands of people all trying to do the same thing at once. How do we do that, and how do we get to do it successfully? And
Exactly.
that requires candid conversations, right? And eventually those hard conversations, if they stick to it, will become successful conversations. Right?
Yeah, and that's where like you want to celebrate people's successes, right? You want to give them the kudos. You want to shout out, "Hey, this person did this great thing," and those are great moments that as a team you can share together. So,
sure.
And we try to do that quite a bit.
So, what about the idea of managing up and the power of influence, right? So you're directors and exec directors above you. You've got a decent amount of people underneath you. That must take a long time to make sure that everybody's reviewed and doing all the process and all that kind of stuff. So
there's a lot there's a lot of that. Yeah, it's interesting because it has varied at different organizations. Like I have been in my career, I've been at various levels, and I'm not a extrovert per se, but I'm someone I'm not afraid to speak my mind. I guess I probably wouldn't be doing a podcast with you if I was afraid to speak my mind. But so I've always been a person who like is willing to put things out there that will speak the truth and
challenge the narrative a bit.
Maybe that's a good way to put it, like challenge the narrative. In a lot of cases, like it's more about, at least what I've found, it's about asking like, hey, why are we doing this way? Because if you can explain it to me and it makes sense, then maybe those concerns go away. But then maybe there's someone maybe the answer is, I don't know why we're doing it that way. That's the way we've always done it, or this is because of some budgeting
Joe
reason
made
or
that
some
idea
this.
2 years ago.
And so like what I've often found is if you're managing up, and it really depends on what you're doing. If you're trying to get promoted, if you're trying to like get some initiative across the board. And so like a recent example that is something we're doing today, right? There's a technology initiative that I'm trying to get accepted and funded and actually eventually implemented. And I've had to go ask the question. This is the way we do it. And so you get rebuffed, and then you get some other people and you say, hey, I agree. And Joe and Karen and Bill agree. And then you gather a bit more evidence and you take it and say, hey, 4 out of 5 product managers agree that we should do things this way. And so you have to start to explore, hey, put in other people, their language. Like, these are the business benefits of doing it this way. This is the money that we'll save, the time that we'll save, the effort, this is how we can serve our customers better. So when you can put it then in terminology so that people understand, because that person has their boss, and even the boss has their bosses, because it's the board, it's the shareholders, it's the whatever. it is. Whoever, so everyone's beholding to someone. So when you can put it at whatever level you're at in terms that those people are going to understand, then that's how. And sometimes it's a sales job. Like we're all in sales to some degree. So we're selling what our team does for the organization. We're justifying our expense if we're in IT, right? Because we are, as much as you like to talk about and people like to talk about the business of IT is seen as an expense, right? So we have to justify ourselves. We have to show value. And the more that people are able to show value, the more you're going to get your projects across the line. You're going to get your budget assigned. You're going to get that headcount approved. You're going to get the things that you need to make an impact on your organization.
So I often think it's important to, especially because you can get bogged down with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and things like that, but the kind of salaries and things that people command at the levels that we're talking about here, they are part of the reason those companies hire you is to challenge that narrative, to bring your expertise from outside or your brain.
100%.
And there's various personalities and type A personalities and otherwise going on at play, especially in large companies. But at the end of the day, if they were paying you to do a thing, then you would not be getting the larger salary that you're getting. They need you to challenge the narrative, to challenge what they're saying, but in a constructive way. Bring me problems, not solutions. Is something my lecturer used to say to me. Don't come to me with problems. Come to me with solutions to your considered solutions to the problem. Start the discussion that way rather than, hey, here's this problem.
You don't because one's seen as a complainer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like all you ever do is you bring me problems. Like, yes, we recognize that things could be better.
Yeah.
So what are the things that are what are we gonna do about it? Yeah. Yeah. And you could see how that could very easily be seen that way as, okay, now Joe is a complainer rather than a team player or someone who's looking to be a problem solver. Yeah. Right. And I think a lot of times people that go far in organizations are people that are problem solvers. They're the people that are going to dig in and go through the umpteenth budget cycle. And this is my passion, my pet project. Like this time it's going to get approved. And those are the things that ultimately can make a difference. And if you have like visionary leaders, right, like they're going to pay attention to that energy and they're going to recognize those sorts of effort that people are putting in. Now, not to say that we all have visionary leaders. Like sometimes you have to be the visionary leader.
Yep,
and sometimes you have to leave your organization to get visionary leadership. Maybe.
And then sometimes those leaders have been brought in from the outside to make really hard decisions as well. So there's the root levels that we're talking about. And then there's upper management that is making incredibly hard decisions because the company is trying to shift in this direction. But at the same time, you've got to maintain a level of status quo and slowly eke that direction at the same time. While keeping your staff happy and all that kind of stuff. It's a challenge.
I'm thinking about, you've worked in some industries that have undergone some pretty big changes, right? Like you've got oil and gas industry, which is going through massive changes right now. And in fact, like their fundamental business, right, is being challenged and modified to away from fossil fuels and towards green energy and renewable fuels and all this sort of stuff. When an organization is making those types of transformations, like there's naturally going to be transformations throughout the organizations. And I think what I like about both of our stories, right, is that we have both shifted with the times and we've changed the arc and trajectory of our various careers. And for me, that was making a conscious decision to move away from being deep into technology and focusing more on leadership and sales and marketing and building markets and things like that and managing products. And for you've recognized a passion for certain aspects of product management, and now I have these technical strengths and I want to now apply some of these business strengths that I have and relationship building skills and things like that. And it's people that can adjust and change over time that have that sort of well-rounded persona and profile that I think can be really successful in organizations, both large and small.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, I think it's that background that helps you garner the respect of the staff that you had. So like in that oil and gas industry, I ended up managing a lot of contractors and a lot of people. And then I also had the hard decision of letting them go from 50 down to 4 and all that kind of stuff, which was a hard lesson to learn, especially if I've done that before. And I've managed previous kind of large teams when I was in the UK, either from a kind of project management level or like a management consultancy kind of level as well, where I've got like different teams for different projects and things like that. And I have to say, I think we have somewhat similar leadership styles there. My leadership style, especially in the roles that I've been, have tend to lent towards, I know my stuff from a technological point of view, but is humble enough to not say that I'm the expert. Even if you looked at some of my skill set and if you looked at my resume, like I often have people tell me that, oh my God, how do you know all this stuff and things like that? But the reality is that you can't know everything. And I know what I know because I've done these things in various different industries. And then because I'm basically a big nerd, I read up on this stuff. Right? But because I like to solve problems, and if I don't have a problem to solve, then I decide a problem that I need to solve. It's kind of the way I am. So you end up becoming an expert in that domain. But from a leadership point of view, I hate to micromanage. I'm terrible at micromanaging.
You shouldn't have to micromanage.
You shouldn't have to micromanage. You want people who are invested, right? And not invested because they need a paycheck, but invested because they need a paycheck, but they like what they're doing. So I like to challenge people, and I ask them, when I first become their manager, I ask them what do they want to do and what are they trying to drive towards. And there's always two answers. They either have a definitive idea, or the answer is they don't know, or they want to have an idea in this kind of skill set. And I like to support them in that. And obviously, any kind of project that comes my way, you have a choice of do you do it yourself? Do you do it with your team? Do you have to delegate that down? Should it be delegated down? Maybe the answer is another of your staff can be the leader of that and then delegate for others and give them the opportunity.
You're hitting on like 5 different podcast episodes. Like, how do you build a team? Like, what's the best way to build the makeup of a team? How do you grow talent and grow people? And that's something I've seen done really well. I've seen it done really poorly. But those kinds of things can make a big difference in an organization, and how you scale your team, how you scale your influence in an organization, because we got to bring it back to the podcast. That's huge.
And I think it's important, like I say, transparency I find is quite important. Some might argue that my leadership style is a little too transparent, but I'm transparent not to a fault, but to what is possible, right? Before, there's just some things you can't share, but even if you can't share it, you can still steer people in a direction that's going to make everybody successful.
Well, and you can be transparent, and you can have a hard conversation with somebody, and you can be professional. And those things aren't mutually exclusive. And it is because I've been in some of the same circumstances where I've had to hire and fire people. I've had to let people go after it became clear very quickly that they weren't the right person for the job. That's not a failing on them. That's a failing on my part, because I made a bad decision. I made a bad decision as a leader to hire somebody that wasn't the perfect fit for a job. And you know what? And unfortunately, that's a decision that it's oftentimes just going to be better to take your medicine. Okay, this isn't going to work out. It's clear. Cut the cord. And that's not to be callous. That's, again, it's one of those things where, okay, maybe our expectations were not aligned properly. And what we both need out of this relationship is different. So
that's right.
It sounds like we have a lot to talk about. We've probably gone on far too long for our first episode, but
I know we're aiming around the 45-minute mark, right?
Through the power of editing, we'll make this to something reasonable to listen to, hopefully.
Sure.
or we'll re-record it and do it all again. I don't know. But I think, what I'm really looking forward to these conversations. Like, this is the kind of stuff I thrive on. I love talking about, these topics, and I can't wait to get some guests in here. Do we have any previews, Giles, of like, I know we don't want to spoil any upcoming guests that are coming up, but I know we had talked about a few different topics. Do we want to preview any of that or whet people's appetite for what's coming?
I won't go into the guests per se, but we've talked about some of these subjects already, right? It's about hiring practices, qualities we look for in team members. And you can imagine from the way we talk about in terms of our leadership style, there's some certain things we look for in that regard as well. How to take care of your network. I have stories of I work with people in the UK and then suddenly I find myself managing them in the US and all kinds of things like that as well. So the importance.
Well, and we're proof that you just never know. You never know when you're going to come across somebody. So
that's right.
It's a very small world, even if it is a very big world.
All right, there's kind of signs of a toxic organization, safe topics in the workplace, stuff like that. How do you keep up to date with the latest technology, even though you're not necessarily doing it day in, day out? How do you keep up the innovation? And I guess what I would say is that one of the things that I do from a leadership point of view is that because I'm very technology focused, I try to innovate as much as I can, and that's, I think, the value that I bring to things. I bring stuff in that. So there's, how do you keep up to date? Because actually there's so much going on, especially with the cloud.
Yeah.
You can't actually keep up to date with everything.
Well, it used to be that you could be an expert on a particular thing. And I think that those days are going, right? I think it's hard to be like an expert on a broad set of technologies and know everything. More and more to get things done requires teaming and bringing in, I've got an expert this is a user experience expert, a technology expert, a data expert, or this expert or that expert. And it's how do you keep up? Like, how do you learn? How do you adopt a learning mindset? And those sorts of things are part of being a good leader and part of being somebody that can influence an organization. So absolutely.
So those are the kind of topics that we were talking about. There'll be a whole ton more. Of course, we may touch on specific industry trends. I think software-based infrastructure is a huge thing at the moment and helps scale and all that kind of stuff.
AI, machine learning, and when the matrix is going to take over.
The hardcore technology of that. We're going to talk about the business side of that. What's the effect of being able to create infrastructure on the fly for scalability and everything else? What does that mean for you and all that kind of stuff? So those are the kind of topics we're going to talk about. And I guess lastly, just to sign off then, is let's talk about cadence and things like that, right? So the aim, and hopefully with editing, that each episode will be 45 minutes to an hour. It will be definitely us two and guests most of the time. And then we're aiming to do this, once a month? Is that right?
Yeah, it's taken us 3 months to get here, but once a month for sure.
That's once we have a commitment, we have to do it, right?
Once we put the first one out, then we're committed.
That's right.
We're pushing our chips into the center of the table.
So I think that's all that's left to say then, is that I hope people found this interesting. Maybe you won't listen to this one the first time, but then if you want to understand who we are, you can come back to this one. And we really hope you enjoy our future shows. Do you have anything else to say there, Patrick?
Listen to Enterprise Influencers and follow us on some social media. Is that what you're supposed to do? I don't know how.
Yeah, I think, of course, we're going to be on all the major podcast networks. We're going to be on the social media.
Hey, like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.
Buy the T-shirt, buy the hat.
We're going to have swag and coffee cups and all the things. So
eventually we will, I'm sure. There's logos, there's all that kind of stuff.
And somebody's got to pay for that logo design.
That's right. It's very expensive. Anyway, so thanks again, Patrick, for doing this with
Giles.
me.
This was fun.
I look forward to our next episode. All right.
Absolutely.
See you later.
Bye-bye.